Today I'm not here to tell you how the sacristan lost his breeches, nor the tale of the innkeeper who spoke with cats. No, today I bring you something grand, something so glorious that even kings spit out their wine just to hear it. I bring you the story of the bravest man ever to walk the land of Castile.
Saint Milan?
No, good lady. Though Saint Milan had his own feats, I speak of El Cid. Campeador, who won battles that weren't even his and scared Moors even in their dreams.
And what did he or she do?
He did more than you ever will by washing your face, boy. Listen well. For El Cid was exiled, betrayed, loved and feared, and still won more lands than a starving king. And all of that without you two. Listen closely, for here begins the deed of the Cid, told by me, his most loyal minstrel. Open your ears and shut your mouths, for a true tale is coming. Before he was El Cid, before his name filled songs and his figure flashed through the centuries like a bolt of steel, Rodrigo was just a boy of Castile. And like all boys, he had a mother who held him during stormy nights and a father who taught him to ride before he could even write his name. Vivar was a humble corner of the world, a village dozing between hills and wheat fields. There Rodrigo was born, around the year of our Lord 1043, beneath the roof of a stone house that still withstood the northern winds. His father, Diego Lainez, was a knight of minor lineage, but of noble spirit and a firm hand with the lance. They said he had more honor than land, and that honor was the first legacy he passed on to his son. From a very young age, Rodrigo had a different gaze. He wasn't rowdy, nor fragile. He was serious, almost silent, but with a bottled energy that seemed ready to explode in every wooden sword fight. At 7, he already knew how to fasten a sword to his side with a solemn look, and in his war games he allowed no injustice. He always defended the weak, even animals, like the time he protected a lame dog the other boys wanted to stone. His mother, Teresa Rodriguez, would often sit by the hearth in winter and tell him stories of Visigothic heroes, of saints who spoke to wolves and kings who built castles with the power of their word. Rodrigo did not dream of gold or thrones. He dreamed of being just, of being strong, of being worthy. When he was 14, his father died, and he was sent to the court of King Ferdinand I as a page. There, in the city of Leon, his true training as a knight began. He learned to read Latin, to measure worth in tournaments, and to understand the politics woven behind stone walls. The court of Leon was a hive of ambition. King Ferdinand, strong and aging, ruled a powerful kingdom, yet one riddled with tension. His sons, Sancho, Alfonso, and Garcia, had begun their martial education, and the infantas, Urraca and Elvira, spun webs in the hallways with words as soft as blades. Rodrigo was received as befitted a young man of minor but respected lineage. He slept among the squires, served in the stables, and trained with the pages under the eyes of seasoned warriors. He soon drew attention, quiet but resolute, not the strongest, but the most precise in handling the sword. He watched the princes without fear, which in court could be seen either as boldness or virtue, depending on who judged it. Prince Sancho, impulsive by nature, quickly noticed his skill and invited him to train by his side, to ride with him in royal hunts. Within his circle of men, Rodrigo began to find his place. Alfonso, more reserved, tolerated him with cold courtesy. Among the three, an unstable balance took shape. One saw Rodrigo as an equal, the other as a potential obstacle. In those days, Rodrigo could not foresee that the princes would become kings, nor that the unity of the realm would be shattered by blood. But he did know one thing from that first winter in Leon. The world was not divided between Moors and Christians, but between men with power and men with courage. And he had chosen to be the latter. When at last he earned his place as one of Sancho's knights, it was not through scheming or noble birth, but through a steady lance and a loyal heart. He was not yet the Cid, but the boy from Vivar was already walking toward legend. The wind of Castile carried with it the scent of iron and dust when Rodrigo donned a real coat of mail for the first time. Court as a page, but thanks to his resolve, he soon stood out. He was one of those who knew when to stay silent and when to speak out in the name of justice. Sancho, the king's eldest son, had fire in his blood and a hunger for conquest. He saw in Rodrigo not just a servant, but a cleaner reflection of himself, impetuous, determined, and with a loyalty that could not be bought. It happened one day that a Navarrese knight, standard-bearer of the king of Pamplona, arrived at the court of Castile with words sharper than any sword. He accused a Castilian noble of breaking frontier treaties near the castle of Pazuengos. And with no proof and no witnesses, the law called for a trial by combat, or Campeador. Rodrigo, already known for his skill and bravery, asked King Ferdinand for permission to take up the cause. I shall defend the honor of Castile with my body and the truth with my sword. The duel was held in open field between planted banners and 100 witnesses. On one side, the Navarrese knight, tall, proud, armed with lance and mace. On the other, Rodrigo Diaz, still young, but with the gaze of one who had already looked death in the eye. They crossed paths without a word, and when the earth rose in clouds of dust, the bodies lunged like crossing meteors. The Navarrese blow crashed against Rodrigo's shield, but he turned with the force of a wolf, and his sword found a gap in his opponent's flank. The standard-bearer fell, defeated. Rodrigo raised his weapon and looked to the king. Silence reigned, until a noble among the witnesses broke the stillness and said, "This man is not merely Rodrigo. He is the Campeador, he who fights in the field of honor and does not fail." The name struck like fire in the soul of the kingdom. Campeador, he who triumphs through justice, without fleeing, without betrayal, with his body as witness. From that day forward, Rodrigo Diaz was no longer a mere vassal. His name became a sword, and his legend, his fate. Ramiro I of Aragon, a seasoned and ambitious king, had resolved to reclaim Graus, a frontier fortress held by the Taifa kingdom of Zaragoza, with whom Castile had an alliance of convenience. King Ferdinand, now old and weakened, authorized his son Sancho, the Infante of Castile, to take part in the defense of their allies. Sancho did not go alone. He was joined by his finest men, and among them was Rodrigo Diaz, now a knight. Mounted on his horse, with a sword not yet bloodied by war, he rode for the first time into the chaos that would define his life. Are we to fight alongside the Moors? Rodrigo asked as the Castilian army approached the lands of Zaragoza. Sancho, 3 years older and with a soul as impetuous as his arm, replied without hesitation. Today, creed does not matter, Rodrigo. The pact does. The Aragonese are the enemy today. Perhaps not tomorrow, but grouse will be ours. He was barely 20 and already commanding seasoned men. On the plain of Zapata, under a cloudless sky, Rodrigo earned his first song among the soldiers. There, when an enemy charge broke the joint Castilian Muslim line, Rodrigo dismounted, raised the fallen banner from the ground, and rallied the men with nothing but his voice. They returned to the fight. Ramiro, king of Aragon, was struck by a Muslim lance and fell on the field, his army scattered. The Battle of Grouse ended in victory for the Allies. Rodrigo did not celebrate. He sat beside the river and washed his sword in silence, not out of remorse, but because something within him had changed. From that day on, he earned a new name among his own, the Good Rodrigo, though the Moors would soon begin to call him El Cid. It was in Leon, in the final days of King Ferdinand's reign, when Rodrigo Diaz, his shoulders still dusty from grouse and his gaze hardened by early bloodshed, first saw Jimena Diaz. He saw her in the chapel of the monastery of San Pelayo, as he attended Mass with the men of Sancho's retinue, and she, with her mother, prayed for the health of an ill brother. She was modestly dressed, but carried herself with the quiet confidence of one who knows her lineage without flaunting it. He, standing among squires, knights, and old hidalgos, noticed her without meaning to. It was just a glance, but it was enough. Days later, they met again, this time at a small banquet hosted by Queen Sancha. Young nobles were sometimes invited to such gatherings to see and be seen, to measure alliances and promise futures. Rodrigo's name was already spoken by many. Jimena, niece to the queen, was regarded with the respect commanded by Asturian bloodlines. They spoke little and with restraint. "Do these tables bore you?" he asked, without meaning to flatter. Only when men speak more of themselves than of what they've seen. Rodrigo lowered his head slightly. "Then I must speak to you of lands, not of men," he said. She held his gaze. "I will listen, if you know how to tell it." When King Ferdinand I died, his kingdom was divided among his children. Sancho received Castile, Alfonso Leon, and Garcia Galicia. His daughters, Urraca and Elvira, were entrusted with the cities of Zamora and Toro, almost with princely dignity. Peace lasted only as long as the respect among princes. Soon, the brothers turned on each other, and Rodrigo, loyal to the core, followed Sancho in his quest to reunite the kingdom. The wars between brothers were bitter. Rodrigo, who believed more in honor than in victory, suffered with each battle, but he did not hesitate. In the year of our Lord 1072, Castile had already taken Galicia. Sancho, the eldest, had dethroned his brother Garcia and sent him in chains to a monastery. Only Alfonso remained, and his crown of Leon. Rodrigo, his standard bearer, was no longer a youth. He was the king's right arm in the field. The Castilian troops crossed the mountains and ravaged El Bierzo. Alfonso was defeated and fled to Toledo, where he was received by King Almamon. But he was not vanquished. He was merely waiting. Sancho, now crowned as sole king, set his eyes on what remained. The stronghold of Zamora, where his sister Lady Urraca held fast, loyal to Alfonso. She would not hand over the keys. "Zamora does not surrender to brothers who betray their blood," she declared, firm atop the battlements. The siege was long. Rodrigo organized the lines, upheld discipline, and endured hunger and treachery. It was then that a knight from Zamora named Belito Dolfos asked to leave the city to parley. Sancho, trusting, agreed. The meeting was brief and fatal. Belito stabbed the king in the back and fled through the Traitor's Gate, still known today as the Gate of Treason. Sancho died among his men. And Rodrigo, who had followed him to the very end, wept for a king denied a worthy burial. The camp dissolved. An army without a king is a body without a head. Rodrigo picked up his lord's sword, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same. Castile, orphaned of its king, turned its gaze south toward Alfonso, the exiled brother, the one who had been defeated, humiliated by Sancho, and sent into exile at the court of the Taifa king of Toledo, where he had learned to wait and to survive. When the news reached Toledo, Alfonso did not hesitate. He donned his finest robes, mounted his war horse, and crossed the Tagus with a small retinue of loyal Christians and Muslims. In Leon, his mother and sister received him as king, but in Castile, the air smelled of suspicion. Rodrigo Diaz, who had served Sancho with iron loyalty, could not simply accept his rise to power. Like many Castilian knights, he wanted to know the truth. Had Alfonso played a part in the plot that killed his brother? It was then, at the will of the Castilian nobles, that Rodrigo demanded the famous oath in the Church of Santa Gadea. The silence was like stone as Rodrigo spoke the words. "Do you swear by your honor, by your soul, and by Almighty God that you had no part in the death of King Sancho, your brother?" Alfonso swore. He did it coldly, without blinking. If the king swears falsely, may God see to it that he dies the same way as his brother. He never forgave Rodrigo for that moment. When he left the church, the new king was legitimate in the eyes of men, but not in his own heart. And in El Cid's, distrust had already taken root. Still, he served Alfonso. Because Castile needed him, because Jimena was waiting, because there were still battles to fight. The lands of the north remained sleepless, awaiting a peace that would not settle. In the court of King Alfonso VI, words were whispered and glances were wary. Rodrigo Diaz had agreed to serve the new king, but the palace walls had not forgotten that it was he who demanded the oath at Santa Gadea. Between tournaments, councils, and courtly duties, El Cid saw Jimena. She was no longer the quiet girl from the chapel of San Pelayo. She was now a noble lady, daughter of Don Diego of Oviedo and niece to King Alfonso himself. Her father still eyed the Castilian knight with mistrust, but Jimena did not look on him with fear. When her eyes met Rodrigo's, there was truth in them, even if no one spoke it. One winter afternoon, after quelling a minor revolt in Galicia, Rodrigo stood before the king. "My lord, I come to ask for the hand of Dona Jimena Diaz, for honor and for love." The king regarded the knight. He knew of his fame, his strength. He also knew that the people loved him more than was wise. He inclined his head. "She's a noble lady. If she accepts, I shall not oppose it." The wedding was held at the monastery of San Isidoro in Leon, with discretion but the solemnity befitting two noble houses. Rodrigo wore a cloak of plain brown wool and bore a sword without ornament. Jimena wore ivory and linen, with a veil embroidered by her mother and a brooch that had belonged to her Asturian grandmother. There were no lavish banquets or overflowing music, only the joining of hands, a quiet yes, and a promise that would endure through years, wars, and exile. The marriage of Rodrigo and Jimena not only united two lineages, it founded a household that, despite war and banishment, would leave its mark on Castile. From that union were born Cristina and Maria, daughters with steady gazes like their mother and indomitable spirits like their father. The youngest, Diego Rodriguez, came later. He was born in still peaceful times, when Rodrigo was a respected figure at Alfonso's court. People expected that one day he would wield the sword of the Campeador when his time came. But the palace walls of Leon were no longer welcoming to Rodrigo Diaz. Time passed, and though his sword still served the king, his presence brought more unease than comfort. He was too beloved by the soldiers, too famous among the people, too upright. And the memory of Santa Gadea still weighed on Alfonso VI like cold iron on flesh. Rodrigo carried out every mission assigned to him, from the north to the Tagus, seeking no glory, but never avoiding it. He won skirmishes, collected tribute from Muslim taifas, and defended the frontiers. On one of these campaigns, without the king's explicit permission, he marched on the kingdom of Toledo, then an ally of Alfonso. He did not do it out of disloyalty, but necessity. The Muslims had failed to make their promised payments, but the move was misinterpreted, or perhaps used as a pretext. Voices in the court, envious or afraid, spoke against him. He has disobeyed the king. He acts as if he commands by his own will. Whom does he really serve? Alfonso listened and did not forgive. Rodrigo adored his children. Upon returning from campaign, he would lift little Diego in his arms, with a smile only Jimena knew. Then he would sit with his daughters, listening as they read from the psalters and described the embroidery they were learning to sew. But peace did not last. A cold letter arrived, with no more words than a command. Leave the court. Go into exile. Thus, without trial or defense, Rodrigo was cast out of the kingdom. He could not take them with him. It was a road of peril, hunger, and lances. So that farewell night, he knelt before them and spoke without tears. "You must take care of your mother. You're my home while I am gone. And you, Diego," he said, placing his hand on the boy's head, "one day you will understand why we fight for honor." Jimena watched him depart, and from that day on, the sword of El Cid rose in distant lands, but his roots remained firm in Leon, in three small hearts that learned to endure before they could rule. And so, my friends, Rodrigo left Castile with his head held high, though the world turned its back on him. He left his land, he left his home, and went off to seek honor where not even the devil could find it. And now come the great deeds, the impossible battles, the Moors trembling in their minarets, the conquests, the betrayals, the legend that made the Cid eternal. What's that? You think I'll tell you the rest just for the love of art? I'm a minstrel, not a holy martyr. If you want to know how Rodrigo earned his bread with his sword, if you want to know how he was feared by Moors and Christians alike, if you want to know how he entered Valencia like a king without a crown, then give me bread, give me cheese, give me wine, or a blanket for the winter, because this poor minstrel doesn't live off air or applause. And you, sitting at home, subscribe and give a like. We'll see each other in the next chapter.